Hey, listeners, I'm currently on a break so that I can rest, write, and prepare new episodes of the podcast, which will begin airing on Thursday, September 11th, 2025. I am so excited about that episode, which is going to be with Dr. Ingrid Clayton, where we're going to discuss her new book on fawning. It is going to be amazing. Until then, I've curated an encore season of some of the most popular episodes thus far. So if you're new to the podcast, this summer season is a great place to start. But if you've been around for a while, these episodes are definitely worth a second listen, and I know you're going to get something new out of each and every one of them. And I can't wait to hear what that is. So be sure to share that in the comments or text the podcast to let me know. All right, let's go ahead and dive into this week's episode. Welcome to Writing Your Resilience, a podcast for writers who want to create stories that change lives, especially their own. I'm your host, Lisa Cooper Ellison. As a writer and trauma-informed writing coach, I'm here to guide you on a transformative journey through the art of writing, self-discovery, and resilience. Each week, I'll share my best tricks, tips, and strategies to help you write more authentically, craft deeper, truer stories, and overcome the common storytelling roadblocks we all face. Together, we'll explore how to bounce back when life gets tough and stay connected to your inner calling. So grab your pen, your notebook, and an open heart. It's time to do the work that changes the world, one story at a time. I discovered Dr. Ramani Durvasula through Ingrid Clayton and soon fell in love with her YouTube channel and the spot-on advice she gave during her Ask Dr. Ramani sessions.
As a trauma survivor,
then I learned about her class on gaslighting and signed up for it in support of the launch for her New York Times bestselling book, It's Not You, Identifying and Healing from Narcissistic People. Dr. Ramani is a licensed clinical psychologist in Los Angeles, California, Professor Emerita of Psychology at CSULA, and the founder of Luna, etc., a company focused on educating individuals, clinicians, businesses, and institutions on the impact of narcissistic personality styles. To learn about her other books and many accomplishments, please see the show notes. During this episode, Dr. Ramani and I took a deep dive into what narcissism is, how narcissistic abuse impacts not just our emotions, but the stories we tell about ourselves, and how you can set boundaries and heal. Before we get to our conversation, I have a few questions for you. What do you really know about narcissism, antagonistic behavior, and gaslighting? If you've been a victim of narcissistic abuse, how do you think this experience has impacted you? What work have you done to heal? What's left to do? I hope you'll ponder these questions as you listen along. Now let's get to my conversation with Dr. Ramani. Have you ever stared at a blank page and thought, I used to love this? If you're burned out, blocked, or just going through the motions with your writing, I've got the solution for you. Free Your Voice, Fuel Your Motivation is a 12-week mindful memoir writing course that helps you reconnect with your creative spark, not by pushing harder, but by being radically gentler with yourself. You'll learn how to regulate your nervous system, tap into your intuitive voice, and build a sustainable, joy-filled writing practice, all while receiving expert feedback from me. Applications for this intimate program open on August 1st, and space is limited. To learn more, see the show notes for this episode or go to lisacooperellison.com/free your voice, find your motivation. Dr. Ramani, welcome to the Writing Your Resilience podcast. I am overjoyed to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So I'm going to hold up your book for those who are watching.
Thank
and
you.
I also see you have like your nice little graphic right on your microphone.
I do. Lest anyone forget.
Perfect marketing advice. So if you listen to this podcast, I want you to go to YouTube so you can see this, because if you are planning to publish a book, which many of my listeners are, there are some nice placements in your settings. We have that, and then your book is in the background.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. The mic flag was something that I don't even know where. I think I was on someone's podcast, and we were probably 30 podcasts in at this point, like 30, 40 in. And I said to my team, why didn't we think about this? And so they quickly ordered it. I'm like, oh, they said it's not too late. And so I can't even sit here and tell you this was a concerted, organized kind of a scheme. It was sort of like I kept watching what people were doing, and I thought, oh, better throw the book in the background. Let's try the mic flag. I actually don't have it today. I often have a water bottle that's even got the graphic on. I forgot it in my house. But those little things, right? And in fact, in our last week of lives, right before the week 1 sales closed, I would wear a sweatshirt that had the name of the book.
I love it.
Oh, yes.
A friend of mine, Laura Cathcart Robbins, who's on this season, she has the water bottle, and then she had like a tote bag. So I saw her at AWP, which is the Association of Writers and Writing Programs Conference, which is like a very big conference. And I knew she was going to be there. And so I'm looking around, and then I see the bag, and I'm like, oh, there she is.
Yep, that's right. Yeah. And we have such a striking, the color scheme of the cover is it pops. So it becomes sort of identified. So yeah, and in fact, one thing we're doing as a part of our promotion, we're doing a lot of raffles, and part of the raffles are that we do t-shirts and sweatshirts with a book cover on it. So, getting them to other people's hands too.
I love it. Well, let's take a deep dive into your book. So I want to begin by giving you an opportunity to just tell us what you'd like us to know about It's Not You.
It's not you, as I sort of make clear in the beginning of the book. It's the story of the hunt told by the lion instead of the hunter, right? The old proverb goes that the story of the hunt always glorifies the hunter and never the lion. And so it's very much, there's many, 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 many books about narcissism out there. I've written a few of them. And there's a lot of academic books about narcissism. There's virtually nothing. I mean, there's a handful, maybe a dozen books or so, more and more every day, written about the experience of the survivor in the relationship, and then what can be done. And I think that the healing process, because we weigh so heavily to what the narcissist is, we're gripped by it, right? It's the same reason we watch true crime podcasts, is that we're gripped by people who can behave in like sort of unethically and without empathy and in this entitled way. It's a fascination because it's actually not how most people go through the world. So again, that's why we watch shows like Succession and all of that, because it's people who just kind of walk through the world and break things and don't care. So we're fascinated by that. But even as I went through the editorial process with the book, it's very natural for me to write about narcissism. And then when I gave them the first draft, they said, go back. There's some good stuff here, but go back again. We need this to be more survivor centric. And I was so glad for the direction, because it's so easy to write the other book. And I think one of the challenges is that healing is a challenging space. There's no quick checklist, right? There's no 5 things to do, 4 things. There's no 3 quick ways to heal from narcissistic relationships. This is a deep dive. And so the book is really about not just what narcissism is briefly enough. So if somebody's a newbie, they're like, okay, I've got this to ground myself, but what these relationships do to us, and then how we get stuck, how we get unstuck, how we heal, and most importantly, how we individuate and sort of give permission to our autonomous selves to shine and recognize that will often be quite uncomfortable for us.
Absolutely. You just gave me an amazing answer to what your book is about. And I just want to go over some of the things that I really loved about this book, because I'm a person who's been affected by narcissism. And, I came from a narcissistic family system. And so there was a lot of imprinting. And I've done a ton of work. And I see this work really as rewiring your system. I mean, that's kind of how I interpret it, because when you come from these backgrounds, some of these ways of being are so unconscious. And what I love about this book is that you describe the experience of a person who has gone through narcissistic abuse so well. So we have the family roles that people could play. You talk about the gifts that people have, like empathy, that can be turned against you and turned into a risk factor. You have so many great, clear definitions for words that show up all over the place, like gaslighting, for instance, in your book. And you offer a framework for understanding what happened to you and also what you can do about it. I mean, I loved all of the writing exercises, and no, there are no 5 steps to clearly get over this, but you give us so many tools in this book that it feels like this wonderful therapeutic framework that people can use. And also how to really think about that storytelling process, which is something that I work with because I'm a trauma-informed writing coach. So I'm constantly working with people with really tough stories. Many of them have experienced narcissism in their lives, often in childhood. And so learning how to unpack this in a way that puts the focus on you and reframes your story is so important. So you work not just as a writer. I mean, you've written a number of books, but you're a clinician.
Mhm.
Can you help us understand how narcissism impacts us? Like thinking about your clients and all of the work that you've done.
There's so many ways it impacts us that I'm pausing on
Yeah.
the answer, because obviously the most profound impact is the individual, right? The individual impact. And I think traditionally, this literature and how it's talked about in public spaces and in a lot of books is in the intimate relational space, right?
Yes.
Is the having a narcissistic spouse or partner, co-parenting with a narcissistic person, because it's often there that it's the most vexing in the sense of it's adults who are picking up self-help books, not kids. And
Right.
so we pick up the book to try to make sense of a relationship that's not making sense, and where we actually have options. There are, for many people, not all, but for many people, the option of, do I stay or leave this relationship, and
Yes.
so on and so forth. But it happens in the parental relationship, and I'd actually argue that's probably where we see the most profound impacts of narcissism, is on a narcissistic parent towards a child. It sets the course for a life, because it actually impacts how a person's nervous system is wired. It impacts sympathetic nervous system reactivity. It impacts how people make attachments, how they perceive attachments, safety behaviors in relationships. That's all impacted by narcissistic parents. But I think we sometimes give short shrift to other very significant narcissistic relationships.
Yes.
Other extended family members, including grandparents, aunts, uncles, and definitely siblings, are a big one. Friendships, because friendships are often very central relationships in our lives. And I've worked with countless clients on narcissistic friendships and the
Yes.
harms that those have done to them. And in fact, in some ways, we might let our guard down in a different way in a narcissistic friendship, because it doesn't have the bells and whistles of an intimate relationship. And that can really come back and hurt us profoundly. Narcissism in the workplace. Just today, I was working on some of our YouTube content and doing some workplace content. So workplace narcissistic relationships, again, can be profoundly impactful. And then there are what I call the scattered relationships: neighbors, member of a church group, people we may run into in different places, where it may not be as psychologically impactful, certainly at the level of our nervous system, but it can certainly trigger us. And it can also certainly make those experiences, which could be otherwise quite pleasant, very miserable. But then it's not as simple as the individual relationships. Then there are systems. It's not about a narcissistic parent, it's about a narcissistic family system.
Yes.
Narcissistic family systems often close ranks and protect the narcissistic abuser, not the person being harmed, because the person being
Yes.
harmed, in a way, is questioning the status quo and the power structures in a family system, which threatens more to dismantle it than telling the person being abused, shh, be quiet. So since people in family systems tend to be invested in status quo, many times those systems can do harm by denying the experience of people within those systems. Narcissistic workplaces. So it's not as simple as a narcissistic boss, but that kind of toxicity sort of scatters itself throughout how that organization is run, and sort of becomes the prevailing culture or ethos of that particular workplace. Then we can take that lens one bit wider, and then we see entire narcissistic systems. Court systems, family
Yes.
court's a great example of that. We see justice systems that behave like this. We see, again, in hospital and healthcare systems that just are unempathic, entitled, dismissive. They're willing to pathologize the person being harmed. And then we have the biggest issue of all, which is society. And society is incentivizing narcissism right now.
Yeah.
I will never, ever stop being struck by how often we give narcissistic people a free pass, a second chance, just another, just one more. And we keep doing that. And when we keep doing that, people in their individual relationships are saying, well, the world gave that person a second chance, so am I supposed to give them a second chance? To which I said, the world should not have given that person a second chance. So no, I actually wouldn't recommend it in your life. But many people in individual relationships, watching the injustices of the world, often perpetrated by narcissistic individuals, are chronically feeling this replaying in their body all the time. So even if you get out of all of your narcissistic relationships, looking at the news could be enough to make you feel like, does this ever go away? We're really surrounded by it right now. And I mean, like I said, our structures and systems really incentivize it.
Yeah. And I see that. And what I see is, I try to avoid the news a lot of times because so much is going on in that space. And what I find is that when you're in a narcissistic relationship, often your experience of reality is dismissed, or you're told that it's not your, experience of reality. So then when you see out in the world, you're looking at something, you're going like, hey, wait a minute, what is this? And then the world is conspiring to say, no, that's not necessarily what's happening. Yeah, it can be so crazy making, and it can really silence you and make you feel like you don't have a good sense of what's going on in the world. And one of the things that I really like about this book is that you lay all these things out so clearly, and you talk about this, in terms of narcissism, but you talk about it in terms of antagonistic behavior. And when I read that, I had this visceral reaction, because like, oh, yeah, that hits differently inside me. And what I like about it is that it allows you to see behavior rather than always having to attach it to a person.
Yeah.
And I think that was, to me, it seemed like a great choice. Can you tell us a little bit about why you made that choice and why you wanted to include that vocabulary in your book?
So that was me, because this word narcissism has taken on a life of its own, and it's often considered sort of a dirty word, right? And
Mm-hmm.
because of that, people take umbrage at the use of the word narcissism. It feels like an attack on a person. And it's really a description of a personality style. It may not be a nice personality style, but I can guarantee you if they're narcissistic, they'll probably be making more money than you. So they're doing okay. But the fact is, it's not considered a nice word.
Yeah.
Now, I thought that because, and that sometimes freezes the conversation right there.
Mm-hmm.
Keep the conversation going. And where I'd actually get a lot of the pushback in this space was when I'd be talking to clinicians, therapists, counselors, that kind of thing. And I thought, okay, then let me use the language of the field. So narcissism is under a big umbrella called antagonism. Antagonism is a trait. And I couldn't get into the minutia of that in a book for the public, but antagonism is a trait, and it cuts across other personality styles, not just narcissism, psychopathy being an example.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about hostility, manipulativeness, exploitativeness, arrogance, entitlement. All that
Yeah.
stuff falls under antagonism. But when we hear the word antagonism, we really hear things like conflict
Yeah.
and behaviors that put a person at odds with other people. These are people who are oppositional, want to take a fight, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but I wanted to make it about the behavior, because a lot of people struggle in their healing where they feel as though they're being disloyal, or that they're mean themselves for saying, "Ugh, I want nothing to do with her. She's narcissistic." That feels
Mm-hmm.
dismissive, and understandably so. But if we could sort of teach people to focus on behaviors that are not acceptable or not healthy in a
Mm-hmm.
relationship, like manipulativeness, like
Yes.
someone taking advantage of you, like putting the lens on that and making it about the behavior, then a person can say, I love my mom. I do. They're my
Mm-hmm.
mom. And they did some right things by me. But this is a person who has never had a problem being passive aggressive, doing the digs. Like this has happened consistently. And as a result, this relationship is not healthy. These behaviors are not healthy. It allows a person to have a more holistic view of the narcissistic person in their life by focusing on behaviors. And I think for some people, it allowed them to have like one more degree of separation where they could give themselves permission to say, yeah, no, this is not actually good for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not being dismissive, but I do have to be different with this person. The one thing I do also come back to: antagonism, narcissism, most personalities, they don't change that much. There's a
Right.
relative rigidity to, and the more maladaptive the style, the more rigid it is. More mentally healthy and personality healthy a person is, the more flexible they are. So
Mm-hmm.
they can adapt and accommodate. But narcissism is a great example of something that's like cement. It doesn't really budge, and so it's not amenable to change. I'd say one of the big pivot points of the book is that radical acceptance around this. I really try to stay away, and I'm sure I made the mistake a few times in the book, from saying they're not going to change, but rather to say their behavior is not going to change.
Mm-hmm.
Because so it's, and I think it's a meaningful distinction. Because when you say someone's not going to change, again, we experience it as defeatist. We experience it as dismissive.
Yes.
But when we say a behavior is not going to change, again, it almost puts us in a position to make very different kinds of choices and different ways of interacting with it. If somebody tells you a restaurant's very loud, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't say this is a bad restaurant. rather they say this restaurant's really loud, you might say, oh, okay, I don't hear well, so this may not be my place, but it doesn't feel as much of an indictment. I know that's a sillier example, but sometimes when we move down the stakes of an example, all of a sudden it makes a little more sense. So one could say, my sister is very antagonistic. My sister's behavior is very manipulative and very invalidating, that a person can then say, and so I'm going to have to make different choices on how I interact with my sister, rather than my sister's never going to change. That often feels like we don't have as much decisional freedom. And that's why I use that framing.
Yeah. And I love how you're talking about this, because when I hear those words, I start thinking about how I'm going to respond differently. So it's very empowering language to think about behavior, because it gives you a sense of choice. And you talked about radical acceptance, which was one of the things that I want to talk about with you. And another thing, what I'm calling toxic hope, this idea that, hope gets you in the biggest trouble. And oh my goodness, when I think back on my life, because I think when you grow up in a narcissistic family system, it does set you up to be attracted to other narcissists, people who behave in these ways. And then there was a point in my time, I'm just going to be honest with you, I felt like I was wearing, toxic hope perfume. And I was just being like, come on, everybody, if you've got narcissism, come into my world, because I will see the best in you, and I will take whatever hurt you have, and I will imagine that I can fix it. And I will imagine that you will fix it too, because I've gone to therapy. I've worked hard. I take responsibility for my emotions. So of course, you're going to do it. You just need the right environment.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
No. And the toxic hope, I love that you put it that way, because I just often call it hope, right? I mean, in the sense that it is why people get stuck.
Yeah.
It is the thing that as a clinician, I have to be very careful when I go in there, and sort of, it's almost like a scaffold, or it's like a game of Jenga, really. I don't want to move the wrong piece or the whole thing's going to tumble down. But it's allowing enough evidence to accumulate, so you become your own level of awareness. But I mean, listen, it's the hope goes, and that's a big part of radical acceptance. Really, radical acceptance is an erasure of the hope of the thing you wanted, which was this person was going to start showing up as a fully formed, respectful, empathic, kind, attuned person. That's never going to happen. Now, what I can replace that with, now that you know the limits of this relationship, because I think that people think, frankly, that if you don't have hope, then you're going all the way from 0 to 60. Then it means you have to leave the relationship. A very, very big, important part of the positioning of It's Not You is that you don't have to leave the relationship. Keep in mind, this is not a book about people who are in relationships with physically abusive people. Obviously, it's a different conversation. These are emotionally abusive, emotionally toxic, emotionally unhealthy relationships. But because people think that if I identify it, it means I have to leave, they often keep themselves in the darkness and just never identify it. I'm saying, actually, you can identify it and you can still interact with this relationship, but you got to identify it, because if you don't, it's going to take a greater toll. And the identifying it doesn't mean that all hope is gone. It means that this is never going to be what you thought it would be, but it doesn't mean you stop going to the family reunions, but it does mean you may go to the family reunion and stay in a different hotel. You may only go to the family reunion for a day. You may go to the family reunion with a very, very clear plan that I want to talk to this cousin, those two aunts, and that person. And you put your focus there, and you really cut the narcissistic person or people a wide berth, and you don't engage with them, and you don't take the bait as much as you can. You go in with your eyes wide open, and not with the sort of like kind of reckless abandon of a child who wants it to be different this year. We are adults, but our child minds are often activated by these relationships. That's what radical acceptance does. It takes the hope of the fantasy away of what we wanted, but in its place becomes a realistic awareness. And for some people, they'll say, well, I don't want that, and I'm leaving because this is not worth it. It isn't worth it for me. And that's a perfectly fine choice too. But it's to understand that it is a choice, that there's not one singular way to proceed.
Yeah. And that's another thing I really like about your book, is that you offer that choice, and then you offer strategies people can use if they're going to stay. If you're going to stay, here are the obstacles you might face. Here are some ways that you can engage with this person and keep yourself safe, or try to have good emotional boundaries. You have all of these things that you do in this book. And I also took your course on healing from gaslighting, which I thought was
Oh,
amazing. It was
thank
excellent.
you.
I really love that class, and I've told other people about it as well. So we'll put this in the show notes because I think it's so good. And then, if you're listening or you're watching, go check that out because you're going to learn so much about it. I have to say that when I was watching this, and I've done a lot of work on myself to get to this point, when I think about radical acceptance, it's accepting life on life's terms, which often
Mhm,
means accepting people are not going to change their behavior. Like, unless they experience some level of pain that is well beyond you. And even
mhm,
then, who knows?
mhm,
When I was listening to some of those episodes, it was like a punch to the chest
mhm,
because I just got in touch with this profound grief that I had around that acceptance. And something that I've learned to say when somebody says something like, I think everyone who's experienced narcissism has their own triggers. For me, if you tell me about the sad parts of your life and then you say something like, and this is how it was in the past, like, oh, I'm not a person who feels very deeply, or, I'm just not good at communicating, or I don't do relationships, or I don't do certain things that seem like they could change. In the past, this part of my brain would be calculating all of the ways that I would be able to support you and help
yeah.
you or create the conditions. What I've learned to say in my head, I don't necessarily say this out loud to the person, is I believe you. When
Mhm,
you tell me something that is, I don't want to use the word defect because I think that's
mhm,
too simplistic. But if you tell me about a struggle you're not willing to work on, I will believe you.
mhm,
You
mhm,
know,
mhm,
I
mhm.
will believe you. If you tell me you're emotionally distant, I will believe you.
And one of the challenges though, and I think this is where this becomes really difficult, is it would actually be easier if they did say, I'm not going to work on this, and
Yeah.
I'm not emotionally deep. For many narcissistic people, they actually misperceive how empathic they are. They often think they're
Yes.
very deep. They often think of themselves as very empathic and
Mm-hmm.
wonderful people. So if people really were saying to you, I can't go deep, like they were owning it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then it almost would be a little bit easier, but that's not what's happening. We're
Yeah.
having to wade and sift through all this confusing stuff of a person saying, I'm such a great person. I'm so empathic. I'm always there for you. And you feel like you've walked through the looking glass. You're like,
Mm-hmm.
what? And you're confused. And if you, again, especially if you had a narcissistic parent, it really can create that sense of self doubt as your first go to and saying, maybe I'm reading this wrong because I don't think they're like that, but
Yeah.
maybe I'm not getting this. And so, yeah, you are getting this. That's why looking at the behavior is so important,
Yes.
even more than what they say about
Mm-hmm.
themselves. Because they might say, I'm so helpful. I'm so good. I'm such a good
Yes.
listener. You saying to them, no, you're not, is no point because you're going to get into a meaningless gaslighted
Mm-hmm.
argument. So you've got to clock the behavior when it's problematic. We have to be willing to call problem or abusive behavior abusive, like,
Mm-hmm.
and keep it that simple. And people say, but there, I said, no, but we're looking at this behavior as what it is. And I understand there might be a backstory, and I understand there might have been other things going on. There's always going to be an explanation. So you've got
Yes.
to ask yourself, is that context enough for you to keep enduring this bad behavior repeatedly? Because the behavior is never going to stop. And I think
Yes.
that's the tension of healthy human beings attempt to contextualize other people's behavior. We
Mm-hmm.
do try to say, like, well, they might have had a bad day at work, or their mom is sick, or their dad did yell at them when they were a kid. All true. But it also lifts the idea that it's almost like we're historyless then, as though we
Mm-hmm.
don't have a whole backstory that came into this as
Right.
well, and we're managing to keep it together. So that balancing act of saying, yeah, no, this isn't okay, and then making decisions on how you're going to interact is really, again, a core element of this book. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's like almost in that way that simple. Like this is all this person can do. And so then you may not even personalize it as much. You use the word grief.
Mm-hmm.
These relationships bring up pretty much constant grief. Because we still, especially when it's a parent and you don't get a second chance at
Yeah.
that. We wanted this to be something more, and it never will be, and we're reminded of it if we
Mm-hmm.
interact with them. We wanted the idea that we'd enter into a lifelong marriage or relationship with someone, and we're beginning to see this is not someone I want to grow old with, and in fact, probably wouldn't be a good idea for that to happen. And so that brings grief because we had an investment in something
Yes.
and we're having to let it go. So we're not just letting go of a person. I think most people would say the idea of letting go of the narcissist, I mean, there's trauma bonding, there's all these other dynamics in place which can make it feel physiologically hard. But from a practical standpoint, a lot of people will actually be able to acknowledge and say, yeah, my life would probably be better with them out of it, right? But then you're grieving what you wanted life to be. One
Yes.
partner for a long period of time, growing old with someone, having a close-knit family system that was a soft place to land. Very normal, simple things to
Hmm.
want.
Yeah, and you're going to face that grief whether you stay or you go.
Correct. That's exactly right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. And I think at least, but again, and this is also yes, you're going to face it either way. But I think that this is where radical acceptance becomes tricky because radical acceptance also isn't, I think a lot of people hear it as, is radical acceptance means I'm giving in? Does radical acceptance just almost means assent and agreement? Like
Hmm.
if I radically accept you, I mean, it doesn't mean you're agreeing. It means you're perceiving it through the lens of this is not going to change. It's almost like if you have windows in your house that face east and you don't want to be woken up by the sun, I'm like, yo, you have to radically accept like those are the direction. That's what your
Hmm.
windows face. You're either going to get
Right.
blackout shades or you're going to have to let it go because we're not changing where the sun rises, or take out your windows. So, it's really understanding that this is what it is. And I think that that's a tough one because I think a lot of the rhetoric, especially in the West, is anyone can change if they put their mind to it. And I guess at some level, that argument could be made about a narcissistic person, but they don't think there's anything wrong.
Right.
Like, so if somebody told me to change something and I don't think it's an issue, there's going to be very, very little motivation to
Hmm.
do this. So, sure, it's a philosophical puzzle. Can anyone change? I would imagine to some degree. Yes. I don't think I'm going to ever play for the NBA, though. I understand what my limits are. So,
Hmm.
I think that there's limits there. And in most cases, most narcissistic people are never going to commit to the level of not only therapeutic work, but day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute work of being mindful and present without contempt. I just haven't seen it happen.
Yeah. And I definitely say I haven't seen it happen either.
Mm-mm.
And,
No.
one of the things you say is, in terms of radical acceptance, look at the behavior. And it makes me think of something that my grandpa said, like, listen to what people say, look at what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing you have to believe. And so sometimes when I'm thinking about radical acceptance, I look at their behavior and I'll think, I believe this. I believe this behavior. Like because that is communicating a message. And often that message is much stronger than the words that are coming out of their mouth. And so when I say I believe this, my next step is, okay, is it okay or not okay for me?
Mm-hmm.
Because I
Mm-hmm.
don't have to make it okay or not okay for them. I
Mm-mm.
don't have to change them. I just have to decide, is it okay or not okay for me? And then what am I going to do next?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, I think your book really validated that for me. And it validated, the importance of having really good boundaries in relationships. Like
Mm-hmm.
if things are not going to change and the capacity for more hurt and more harm is there, even if you're going to be in a relationship, you have to decide how deep you're going to go, which I also know is one of your acronyms.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you have to decide, and it's okay to decide to stay, but also to say, this relationship is not serving me, and I'm either going to pull back really far
Yeah.
or I'm going to estrange myself or cut this relationship off. Though that doesn't mean it's going to solve all your problems by any means.
Yep. No, it's not. And I think that the disengagement, to me, disengagement's on a continuum from
Mm-hmm.
you're in the relationship and you're just not taking the bait, not having the same conversations, to you're spending less time to them, to you're fully leaving.
Yeah.
So I think viewing disengagement on a continuum can, because it's all disengagement, right? The most
Yes.
extreme form of disengagement is no contact. But a lot of folks are sort of in what we call sort of a gray rocked, yellow rocked kind of firewalled space with them, where we're being very discerning and careful about how
Mm-hmm.
we share about ourselves. And it's so interesting because I still quote unquote make the mistakes. That even though when I know someone in my midst is narcissistic, I might be caught in the joy of a moment, share the good news, it gets shut down. I know for me, I mean, and this is because this is what I do for a living. When narcissistic people keep doing the narcissistic things, while there is a moment of grief, there's also a moment of like, "Whew, thank God everything I wrote was right." So there is a bit of reassurance. But I have to say though that it's a we do sometimes let our guards down because we see a human being in front of us and we think we can be with them like another human being. And that's where for us, it's a certain mindfulness. We have to say, okay, I'm going into this room where this is how it usually goes down. So I have to be careful to not share this. And this is why building up social support is such an important
Yes.
part of healing, because you need what I call gaslight free zones. You need
Mm-hmm.
places where you will be seen and you will be heard and you will be validated and you will not be made to feel like you're crazy. A point I make, in my work and sort of hint at in the book is this idea of the broken heart of the narcissistic relationship is one thing, but broken hearts heal. They really do.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that does such great harm, it's not the broken heart in the narcissistic relationship, it's the being made to feel crazy.
Yes.
And I think to me, that's the true harm, because we carry that with us longer. We doubt
Mm-hmm.
we doubt ourselves in so many ways for such a long time. But it's figuring out where you fall on that disengagement continuum and making decisions accordingly. And for some people, they may be in a narcissistic long-term relationship marriage, say, I am not having joint custody with this person.
Mm-hmm.
That's what family court's going to do. So I'm going to disengage as much as I can. And then as soon as I know that the kids will be in a better place, either they're in later adolescence or they're 18, that's when people will file and then they're done. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? So the disengagement's almost like a slider,
Yes.
on a panel, like you're just sliding it over more and more as time kind of goes on. For some people, they disengage and then a new rock bottom happens. Someone says
Mm-hmm.
something hurtful to your child, or they do something really harmful, and then you're like, okay, I'm done. So I've seen that happen. This is why seeing it clearly is so important, because when you see it clearly and these things come up, instead of being surprised by them, you're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, this is getting worse. And this has now crossed the line I can't tolerate. So everyone has that line. And again, then the disengagement conversation might become quite different.
Yeah, I love that idea of the slider. And that's another thing about your book that's so great is you have all of these metaphors, the gray rock, the yellow rock, the firewall, and it makes it concrete and real. And
Mhm.
that's one of the things I love. And when you're thinking about, disengagement, each time you disengage, you're going to experience a certain kind of grief. And you may also have pressures around you, especially depending on the system you're around, to make nice, forgive in that emotionally bypassing kind of way, all of these things. And if you've divorced yourself from yourself, divorce yourself from
Mhm.
your feelings, divorced yourself from your bodily sensations, your sympathetic
Mhm.
nervous system, that's
Yep.
another thing you talk
Mhm.
about.
Mhm.
It can be so easy to get sucked back in to make nice and fawn, having a fawn response in terms of trying to please that person and see things through their eyes. And when you set up these boundaries, a piece of this grief can be disenfranchised grief because
Mhm.
other people are not going to see it, they're not going to understand it, and they may not even validate your right to be sad about this. Can you talk about disenfranchised grief
Yeah.
and how this shows up in these relationships?
Absolutely. So disenfranchised grief, ambiguous grief, all these sort of these unrecognized griefs. We usually annex the term grief to only be used for when somebody dies, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so that's the only sort of validated form of loss where somebody's allowed to take the time and have the emotional reactions associated with grief. Loss is loss. People going
Yes.
through divorce are experiencing loss and grief. People going through a job loss are going through loss and grief. People whose house burns down are going through loss and grief. People who
Mm-hmm.
move away from a home, even if they're downsizing and it was a home they lived in for 40 years, are going through loss and grief. And when it is in those forms, it is disenfranchised. The world how do we franchise grief? We allow time for it. Your mom died, you can take 2 weeks off from work, or
Mm-hmm.
we understand you need to travel for a funeral, or you take the time you need. It's given permission then. But when a person is going through the grief of recognizing that this relationship is harmful and it will never be the thing they wanted, that is not going to be recognized as grief. And in
Yeah.
fact, I've had it happen for many clients who might use the languaging we're using in therapy and saying, I'm going through grief. And the other person will say, how can you be going through grief? You're still married. The person's still there.
Mm-hmm.
As though the only way you could be going through grief is maybe if you split up, and definitely if they died. And that leaves people once again feeling almost gaslighted by the world, as though their
Yeah.
emotions don't have validity. And then to your point, as you said, is that there's a real tendency to numb and sort of dissociate from these negative feelings. And if, I talk about this in the book, is Dr. Jennifer Fried's work on betrayal blindness
Mm-hmm.
and betrayal trauma, which is very, very powerful work, because what she says is that the our human need to maintain connection and attachment almost supersedes everything else. And what that means is anything that's a threat to attachment, you better believe our nervous system's going to figure out a way to sort of sort it away, because we need to keep the attachment. So in the most profound way, it would be a child who's being abused. That child is not going to be able to construct the narrative of this is a harmful, abusive person, because then they can't form an attachment to an essential caregiver. And so that child will then, again, experience this thing called betrayal blindness, which isn't really dissociation per se, but it is because it's there, the memory's there. In dissociation, the memory's there too. But I always tell folks when you move into a house, like you move into a new house, a new apartment, you find this closet, and there's a closet with like those crazy high shelves. And you're like, oh, that's a great place to store stuff. And you always remember the next time you see that stuff is when you move out of that place.
Right.
It's so out of the way that you're never going to use that place regularly, or you'll forget the stuff is there. But I think it's this betrayal blindness, and she uses this beautiful metaphor, Dr. Fry does, of it whooshing away, because even in that moment, we're like, nope, this does not integrate. It's a form of cognitive dissonance in me keeping attachment. So what happens though is the betrayal blindness seems like, well, that's a nice plan. Then I can stay in this relationship and not think about it. And not how it works. All that schmutz piles up, and you start feeling sicker and sicker, and people will develop autoimmune, and they'll develop all kinds of physiological issues, from dermatologic stuff to migraine headaches to muscle tension to RA, everything you can imagine, because they're holding this in their bodies, and it catches up, mental health issues. And many times we're not even able to meaningfully connect it. To me, the belief is, as people become more and more aware of narcissism, what it is, some of that kind of, that, if you will, that betrayal blindness gets sort of dislodged, and a person can be made to see the situation more wholly. And that, again, it's almost impossible for a child, but it is, whether it's in a lot of folks in narcissistic relationships are what I call overregulated. They don't express emotions in a strong way anymore because they've been told and shamed about their emotions. You're being ridiculous. You're too sensitive. You're like, you're too dramatic. And so you see these very overregulated, accommodating people who are in narcissistic relationships. A lot of folks have the fawn response in these relationships. The fawn response brings on a lot of shame because people feel complicit in the relationship. So it's messy. And this is why trauma-informed work becomes so crucial with survivors of narcissistic relationships, because I really think it's almost like a two-part process. Not only are we educating people about the relationship, we're explaining to them how almost like their body and mind were having to participate in this relationship in ways because they didn't know what it was. So as you get the education and you can start understanding, your sympathetic nervous system is gorgeous. It's just trying to keep you safe, but it does it in kind of messed up ways. I always say it's like an overzealous bodyguard. I'm like, slow down, bodyguard. Like, that's okay. We're good. And just like tell your bodyguard to chill a little bit. So, or it's like a really sensitive home security system. But it's understanding that all it's trying to do is keep you safe. And instead of feeling shame about it, that we can actually sort of reach in within ourselves and almost talk to it, right? And do that parts work and say, I understand how you're trying to protect me, but I'm okay. I got this. And it's okay if I fail at this. Nothing bad's going to happen. We have to talk ourselves through that. And this is not, like I say, there's no 5 steps to this. This is a long process of somatic work, of cognitive work, of behavioral work, of emotional work, and of spiritual work. It's a lot of work. And we have to commit to it every day, but commit to ourselves and give ourselves permission for some level of individuation and autonomy, but it will never feel comfortable. I think some of us will go to our graves wishing that the narcissistic people would approve of us. I always talk to clients who say, am I a horrible person because I think this of my mother? And I'm saying, you're seeing a situation clearly. I'm missing the horrible part of this. But people feel it's a betrayal of the narcissistic person to see them clearly.
Yeah, I definitely say that is true. I've seen that in other people I've worked with. I know that I have felt that myself. And, a couple of things in your book that I really enjoyed was, one, when you talked about the fawn response, you talk about it in terms of it not being a choice. This is a response that's happening in your nervous system.
That's right.
And I felt my whole body go, yes, there it is. And I've been talking to clients I work with as I've been recommending your book, saying, you need to read this part. You need to understand how this works. Because when people understand these things, it helps them feel more empowered, and it makes the process okay. Because one of the hardest things you have to do is learn to live with cognitive dissonance. you love this person, and this person is manipulative, and this person puts you down, and you have good days, and you have horrible days, and it's all of it together. And that is such tough work.
It's tough work, and it is there's an exercise in the book I have called the multiple truths exercise. It is, I mean, we live in a world right now where our news media will not allow us to say multiple things can be true. It's all about
Yes.
one thing's true and it's black and white and one person's bad and one person's good. The multiple truths exercise is when you write it down, just like you said, we can break through cognitive dissonance when we can give ourselves permission to say more than one thing is true here. And so I literally will have a client take out a piece of paper, we'll do it together, however, use a whiteboard, whatever, and write it down. And I'll give you an example of some things that clients have said, like, I have a mother. My mother was very controlling. My mother was very intrusive. I wish I never had to talk to her again. I am sad that this is how my mother is. I feel guilty that I feel this way. I love my mother. I dislike my mother. And it becomes a sort of stream of consciousness. And then when the client sits down and looks at the list, first of all, they'll say, no wonder I'm having such a hard time, which in a way, it's sort of a place of grace for yourself. Like, of course, this makes sense why this is so difficult, because we can't get lost in your mom's bad because she's intrusive and narcissistic. It can't be that, because it's not that simple. And when a person tries to paint themselves into that corner, it feels not only disingenuous, it feels inauthentic. But when they can hold space for, I love this person and this person isn't good for me, and they can use the word and not the word but, they can start putting together a series of sentences that then can help them say, like, okay, this is why it's complicated. This is why it hurts. This is how it's always been. And I'm going to have to find a way to interact with this person that accounts for all of this happening at the same time. And so I think that holding space for that multiple truth is a really important way to kind of loosen up some of that cognitive dissonance. But the problem is, being in cognitive dissonance is not wanting that sense of internal tension, right? It does mean that to be in a narcissistic relationship, there's always going to be a state of tension. That's by definition what the relationship is. No one wants to feel tense, but the alternative is to be in denial and lie to ourselves about what this is.
Absolutely. Yeah. And because this is such hard work, one of the things that you mentioned multiple times in your book is the importance of finding a support group for people who've experienced narcissistic abuse. So here's my question to you. Where do we find these?
Yeah, so this is tricky because, I have spoken to some. I have a healing program for people who are experiencing narcissistic abuse. That's a monthly program. People get a workshop and Q&A, and there's a community platform. So that's an online platform where people actually offer a lot of support to each other. So I think for many people, this happens online because it can sometimes be hard to create it in real life. Zoom has been a real sort of saving grace because people can come together from all kinds of large places. I've been shocked at the sheer number of book clubs that have come up around the country in just a few weeks around my book, and people are letting these turn into de facto support groups. Put it out there. You never know what could sort of come of that, if you will. And then there are some existing support groups out there. I would say go to them, vet them, see how they feel. But I always tell folks, because sometimes support groups are only peer led, this is where you have to trust your body, because I have heard some uncomfortable stories of what things that have happened in these support groups. And I'll say, and this is the time you exert your autonomy and you get out. Like, that's the key piece. I've spoken to some that are very, very well run, some not so well run, but I think some people might want to take the lead on trying to start some of these, but experiment, try it out. It's interesting. I had a conversation with someone the other day on one of my on a podcast interview, and they were asking about the utility of Al-Anon for people who have narcissistic family members. It's an interesting approach because addiction and narcissism have so many shared features. So when people are sharing the emotional experiences they're having when they are having to manage relationships with addicted family members, it is a very common circumstance. I think especially people who have family members who are both narcissistic and living with addiction, those are often a great fit. For people who have only family members who are narcissistic but not living with addiction, it can be complicated because many people are using the addiction frame in there, but
Yes.
some of what gets talked about there, I'm very, very, very careful though to caution folks who are in narcissistic relationships who immediately want to jump to the conclusion that they're codependent. I'm like, slow down, sister, because that word carries with it there's a different kind of a dance happening in codependency than there is. I mean, are there some people who have codependent qualities and are in narcissistic relationships? Absolutely. But I don't think it's the vast majority. And I think that that is a incorrect characterization. Some people find a lot of solace in the codependency literature, which is great. But I also think that some people then sort of wear the mantle of being a codependent and say, this is how I'm going through the world, and it's an identity. And I'm like, no. The narcissistic relationship is a subjugated relationship. And once you can kind of get all the tentacles off of you, there's still a self in there. And we're just going to have to get that self unclogged from all the weeds and then let it kind of grow on its own.
Absolutely. And I think when you are thinking about it in terms of codependence, then there's a piece of it that is you, which is antithetical to what your book is about, is that no, it's not you. It's that these behaviors exist and they're not going to change. And part of your job is to recognize it and accept it and then decide what you want to do. And what I can say of my own understanding of 12-step programs and experience of that is that here are some things that I think are ingredients that can work really well for groups, is that there is a structure that people can follow that doesn't depend on one person, like especially for peer-led groups. I think there's a structure, and that does not, in 12-step programs, it is a spiritual structure, and that does not work for everyone.
No, it doesn't.
And I say that right away, but I think having some sort of structural framework for here's how we're going to work through problems, that's more of like the traditions, like here's how we're going to operate as a group, here's how I'm going to think through the problem solving process, in relation to it. I think those aspects of it can be really helpful. And the concept of sponsorship or partnership or people that you can use as support, and then talking authentically, I think those ingredients are really helpful. But I agree with you that if someone is just in a narcissistic relationship and there's not an addiction component to it, it may not necessarily serve you. I mean, you may get some benefit if there's nothing, like if, it's like nothing or this, that might be better than nothing. But is it going to give you everything you need in order to truly heal? And in order to buffer yourself and shield yourself from future issues with narcissism, which of course, you can never shield against all of it, but getting better at recognizing it, or having a space where you can go, I engaged and here's how it went. And here's what, and I engaged in the pattern again, and being able to unpack that with other people who also understand that language and what's going on can be really helpful.
Absolutely. The most simple thing in the world is just knowing you're not alone with something.
Yes.
And when somebody just is sharing, yep, this happened, because otherwise the isolation and the loneliness that comes from how distorted and contorted, because remember, the narcissistic people are often very valued in the world. Their employer might like them. They might have friends. They might have family members that like them. And so you do feel very confused in all of this. It's not like everyone's like, oh, you're with a terrible person. And then you sort of feel supported by the world because they recognize that. If everyone is sort of extolling the virtues of the narcissistic person, you feel even more lonely and isolated. So hearing other people who are going through this, and some people feel foolish if they've sort of been pulled in by the gaslighting. Well, maybe I'm foolish and I couldn't see it. And then you realize we all see it.
Yeah.
Those things go a long way to, again, the ungaslighting of the self and recognizing that it's not you that had something unacceptable or wrong with your behavior. It's really what they did. But it's key to constantly come back to, you're not responsible for their behavior. And I think a lot of folks in narcissistic relationships say, well, I did this, so maybe that brought out that. And I'll say one of the big, this is where I really take umbrage with the field of mental health, because many therapists were willing to say, like, well, what led up to them saying that? I'm like, I don't care what led up to them saying that. They said that and that wasn't okay. Let's just stop there. And whatever led to that, it doesn't matter. But when a therapist says that, they're now putting they're putting the onus in some ways on the other person. Well, maybe if you didn't say that, put the hot spotlight on where it belongs. That was not okay. Let's just start there. Yes, over time, we could try to contextualize, especially when my clients say, I'm not leaving. I'm like, okay, then given that these kinds of screaming jags are what are so difficult here, let's sort of figure out what the whole sequence is here so we can
Yes,
figure out what we can do to get you to a better place of safety. But it's never, let's figure out what you said to set him off, because
exactly.
that makes it sound as though, again, that you're complicit. And that's a big error the field of mental health has been and continues to make in this realm. We have to be able to call that behavior a problem behavior.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think naming it for what it is so important. And then also, what I love is that you're helping people see what the pattern is, the pattern of
Mhm.
communication or the pattern of behavior, and figuring out how you can recognize it early and figure out what choice you're going to make in order to disengage from the pattern.
Yep.
Because that's the part you can control.
Mhm.
And, other people's behavior is their behavior, and it's either okay or not okay. And you have to really be able to understand what that is. And I agree. I think support groups are definitely a way to do that. So I'm going to ask for some of that information you had about the support group you have. Also, I encourage those of you who are listening, who get this book, to connect with other people who also have it, so you can begin to talk about these things and have a common language for how we can support each other and help each other heal.
Mhm.
So I have a few just lightning round questions. And also, I want to say congratulations on having
Thank
your
you.
book on the New York Times bestseller list.
Thank you.
So good, and also so deserved. What is your best piece of writing advice? Something that someone has said to you, or something you're like, when I'm writing my books, this is my go-to.
You figure out what time of day your mind is the sharpest, and you completely cordon off that time of day when you're working on something like a bit, whether it's a short story or book or whatever. For me, it's morning. So I would like, especially when I wrote this book, because I had other responsibilities. So many
Mm-hmm.
times weekends, for years, I cleared out weekends. And so, but I know I'm at my best in the morning. And I'm best in the morning when I have a shower. So I'd get up, I'd have a shower, I'd have my tea, and I'd go. And so then when I needed a little bit of head clearing, I would do something where I'd have to move around, clean the house, whatever, feed the hummingbirds, whatever thing would put me in motion, and then sit down. And I know for me, somewhere around 4 or 5 o'clock, my capacity to do that kind of work fades
Mm-hmm.
substantially. So then it could be emails and the other stuff that's sort of more, it's a little bit more procedural. So that's how I would construct my day. But I think for everyone, there's a time of day when you're your sharpest. And it's not always morning
Yes.
for them. Some people it's late at night. You
Mm-hmm.
need to figure out what that time is. And that's where I would say, at least I know if I start in the morning, I am going to be able to get a good couple of hours out of this, no matter what. And then, so it's almost like it was when something was on the table for me to write and it was important, I wrote it well, that would take precedence over everything else. And then everything else would come. Even if it was only a 1 or 2 hours, I would grab the best 1 or 2 hours of the day and devote that to writing. But I'd also say one other thing about writing, and this is where, my editor support mattered. I tell people this book was written 3 times, literally 3 times. And the first time it was written from, I wrote it as a scientist and a scholar, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was a solid book. And the editor's like, this is so smart and I'm learning so much. And no, absolutely not. And so she's like, you need to go back. And so the second time I wrote it as a clinician. And that was also, it was definitely not as smarty smart. And it was definitely not so third person. But she still said, "Mm, I'm not feeling it." And the third time I wrote it from my heart. And so the
Mm.
science was in there, the clinician was in there, but this time it was, she really said it to me. She's like, someone is sitting across from you and they are struggling. This is not
Yeah.
how you're going to talk to them. And so she then pushed me, and that was hard. That was hard. It was more vulnerable, but it helped to have an editor push me in that way. Don't get me wrong, I was not happy with this editor. I'm like, I've
Mm-hmm.
given you 2 books, and now I'm going to give you a third. And the third is what you're reading, is where the human being wrote the book, and it flies. I was trained as a researcher and an academic.
Mm-hmm.
Then I wrote as a clinician. So the two things I've been trained to do for the bulk of my adult life, I was being told for the first time, you've got to write this as a human being.
Yeah.
And so much scientific writing doesn't feel like it's written by a human being. And so it was a whole new evolution for me. I'm glad I did it because I think it's actually why people are being affected by it. So that editorial support matters a lot, even if you're mad at the editor.
Yes, it does. And you are not the first person who has come on and said, I thought I wrote a brilliant book. And
Yeah.
then I gave it to either beta readers or my editor, and they went,
No. Mm-mm.
And so I think, yeah, being willing to hear what people have to say is so important, because they're not saying it to hurt you if they're not a narcissist, right? If they're not engaging in an antagonistic behavior, then they're not. But you have to be able to take that in. And sometimes people start writing from the heart, and then they have to get that head version going where you're looking at research, you're looking at other things, but sometimes you start with the ideas and the research, and then you have to bring the heart in, and being able to do both is so important. Well, this is not your first book rodeo, right? You've written other books that have been successful, and I've been watching you launch this book, and I want to tell people, beyond learning what you have to say about narcissism, I think people need to follow you just to see all the incredible things you've done to launch your book and to get it out into the world. It's truly a masterclass. I mean, it's all the things I would tell someone to do. You've got a class, you've done so many Instagram lives, and you have this great Instagram, and you've done all these podcasts. I mean, and you have all of the stuff that you do. How are you nurturing your resilience and caring for yourself, especially during this really intense time of your book launch?
I'm not, and I'm going to own that. This is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I will not regret it. We wanted to get one book over this sort of cultural indicator of this best-selling list, but I know I could never do this again. This was so I'm telling you, this is not for the faint of heart. We talked to anyone we could who would be willing to have a conversation with us and answer our questions honestly, who's had a best-selling book in this kind of contiguous space. Ask them what they did. We studied what people did. We went to the Instagrams of people who had best-selling books, and we rolled the Instagram way back to when they released their book, and we looked at what they did. And then we said, unless we're philosophically not aligned with a podcast, we don't care if 100 people listen to it or 50 million people listen to it. If we're going to go on any podcast that asks, we pitched a lot of podcasts, a lot said no, but I'm not taking care of myself. And I will have to be honest with you, I don't know how I would have found the time to. And this was one of those choice points where it was my biggest form of self-care above all else. That was sleep. I'm kind of a zealot about sleep. And so I'm not someone who'll stay up until 1 a.m. working. Somewhere around 9 o'clock, I always say, the carnival shuts down. And so, and I have a very clear nighttime routine, and I crawl into bed, and I will either read, or there's little games I like to play on my phone. All these things bring me down, and that's very important to me is sleep.
Yeah.
And so I will say, if I were to say there was a form of self-care, I would be being very, very careful about sleep as much as I could. But it was very, very difficult. And I think a lot of writers guess you got to launch it this way. It's so much work that it was, and I was very lucky. I had a small team. We didn't hire a publicist because I didn't have a lot of money. I mean, I had a team that always works with me, and they shifted all their focus to this, a team of 3. None of them had expertise in book publicity either. So there's something to be said about grit, hustle, and heart.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can hire that, just pay someone. You better have the people around and that they believe in your book. But I think I didn't have the money. Publicist is going to cost me $20,000 to $50,000. I did not have. And so we had to figure this one out. And I want people to know that, because we did do this on our own. We did not have a team of folks around us. We didn't have big tech support. What you see is sort of what a friend of mine helped me build in a room in a house. And that's that. So but it was also where we were lucky was we had an incredibly, incredibly engaged community. Nobody is supporting this community. They're just sort of being told, don't say they're narcissistic. This is a community that's been shamed. And we're like, I want to speak to them. That's who this is about. And so as much as we could, and we try to incentivize it through, I put almost hundreds of hours into building out courses and interview series, giveaways that would be for free, to incentivize people to buy the book and almost have a much more holistic experience of it. So there was a bunch of extra work. And I think some people say, are you kidding me? I have to go develop all this stuff. It's what we did. And it seemed to have worked. I don't know. I mean, it's so hard to pick out the one thread of what happened. But I also want to say to folks, don't get lost in thinking there's one magical viral thing that will happen. Everyone wants the Oprah effect or something like that.
Of course.
I have no doubt if she puts her sticker on your book, it's going to do well. But I don't know that that's how the world works. I think it's you do 1,000 little things, and they all come together and you remain engaged. And that's really what it's about. But I think waiting for the one viral moment, which I think a lot of people hope for, if only this one person would mention my book, I'm like, don't go there. You're giving too much power to a person who probably won't take notice of you. Take control of your destiny and do it. But I am going to take a vacation in July. It'll be the first vacation I've taken in years. So I'm actually really looking forward to that.
For those of you who are listening, I am clapping right now because you have so earned it. And here's what I love about this. One, you're so honest and you're saying, I haven't figured this out and it was really hard. And I am not taking care of myself to the level that I would like to at this point. And that is real. And so many authors go through what I call the gauntlet, right? There's so many things to do. And what I can say is that you did all the research, you understood who your audience was. And here's my experience as a person who was watching this happen and participating on the sidelines. I felt like I was part of a community. I felt like I was, I felt like I was part of something. And to me, I think that's one of the reasons why this book has been so successful. It's, I mean, yes, I feel like when I'm reading your book, like you are talking to me, you know, and I feel like you're not just talking, you're talking to me, not at me, right? Not as a clinician who, or a smart person. You're like, hey, come on, come into my world. Let me join with you. Let me help you. And that was really important. And then, you know, all of these things you've done with your class, with the Instagram lives, with the messages, it's like, hey, something else is happening, folks. Come on, be a part of it. And that made me want to cheer you on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, and and I'm not, the lives and things like that don't come naturally to me. So I just try to roll with it. I care about it. But yeah, it was not, and we could have done all this and this could not, we also may not have gotten the success. Because again, like I said, we're not well resourced. We were in no position to bulk buy books or not. We had none of those resources. I sort of leveraged my money a bit, said, okay, I can put this much into it. And then when that's gone, we've done all we could. And so, but it was speaking to a community. I know I've been through this. And I wish when I was going through this, there had been community. So it's a privilege to create that with others. And then they became their own force to be reckoned with. That's, I view the success of this book as, yes, I had the opportunity to write it, which was amazing, but the book got lifted on the shoulder of thousands of people. And that's how this happened. And so I see this as a very shared success with everyone who cared about this issue enough to get it out there, pick it up, and have the courage to read it.
Well, I am so glad that you took this on and that you wrote it. And I want everyone to read your book because it is so important. What is the best way for people to find you, buy your book, connect with you?
So you can buy my book anywhere they sell books. We had a minute. The book did do very well. So some booksellers ran out, but everyone's got it back in stock, including some of the sellers like Target and Walmart, which I know some people sometimes will go run errands and want to find the book there. Barnes and Noble, or any bookseller you can think of pretty much will have it or will order it. Your local bookstore will. Your local library, you can ask them to order it. And so if that's an easier way for you to get it, that's also an option. But you can buy it anywhere. I think actually right now Amazon's running a sale at 30% off, so you can even get it at a discount. And to find me, you can go to my website, which is DoctorRamani.com. You can see everything we're doing. I have daily YouTube videos that come out every day, usually sort of my reflection of that day. So, the videos I've researched, whatever. So that happens every day. We have a healing program for people who are going through narcissistic abuse. It's a monthly program, new content every month. There's a workshop every month. There's a Q&A every month. There's a guided meditation. There's the existing community platform. So it's a place for people to come together, but actually also have this programming given to them. And there's like at least 12 to 15 journal prompts a month on that topic. So you get a lot there too. And so, yeah, all these different ways, and there'll be more as time goes on. If you're a therapist and you want to know more about how to work with clients experiencing narcissistic abuse, I developed a 36-hour program that culminates in a certification on working with clients with narcissistic abuse. You can go to the website of PESI.com. I did it in a partnership with them, and you could order the course there, and they often run specials, and you can really get it at quite a discounted price.
So that is a lot. And if anyone missed it, it'll appear in the show notes. So don't worry, you will be able to find these things. And here's some things I'm going to say. One, buy the book. Two, review the book and review it on, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Goodreads, anywhere you can. And also ask for it at your library, even if you've already bought a copy of the book, because then someone else who may not be able to afford it, but needs it, can get access. So do those three things for Dr. Ramani and also for every other author.
Yes, it's a great thing to do. And I've even said, some people are like, well, I'd love to is there other things I can do to get this book out in the world? I've even told folks, if you have a local domestic violence program or anything like
Yes.
that, you can buy a few copies. I'm doing that in LA, donating it to programs. So like buy a few copies and donate them, if that's something that feels right to you. But definitely ask your libraries, because I agree, even if you already have it, it's a way, because libraries often have both audio books and they'll get an audiobook license so that multiple people can borrow it. So there's ways within your community to ensure people are getting it.
Well, Dr. Ramani, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me and to be on the podcast. I am so grateful, and I am so excited to tell other people about your book.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this conversation.
Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about this week's guest, please see the show notes for this episode. But before you go, I would love it if you would text the show if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or leave a comment on YouTube letting me know your biggest takeaway for this episode or what you loved most about it. And speaking of your comments, I want to thank each and every one of you for the comments that you have shared thus far and the ways that you've reached out to me through email, my Substack, and all of the different ways that you have to connect with me. It has been such an honor to get your feedback and to hear what you love about the podcast. Thank you so, so, so much. I look forward to engaging with it more in the future. And listeners, if you haven't had a chance to connect with me or to share something about the podcast, I would love to hear from you too. Until next time, please remember that your story matters. And as you work on it, you change lives, especially your own. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. I truly couldn't do this podcast without your support. If you love this episode, here are 3 simple ways you can keep this show thriving. 1, subscribe or follow Writing Your Resilience on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube so you never miss an episode. 2, leave a 5-star review to help others discover the podcast. 3, join my engaged writing community by signing up for the Writing Your Resilience newsletter. As a thank you, you'll receive a free copy of Write More, Fret Less, a toolkit for gaslight-proofing your writing practice. Have feedback for the show, a topic you'd love me to cover, or questions you'd like me to answer? Drop a comment on YouTube, text the show, or email me at writingyourresiliencepodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, keep writing, keep growing, and keep showing up for yourself. Your story matters, and I am so proud to be writing alongside you.